Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's ChatGPT panel discussion and demonstration. My name is Cornel Skeldema van Wyk from the Library's Digital Scholarship Centre. And I'm going to jump right in and introduce our speakers, all of them, before we start for today. So first up will be Dr. Sean van der Merwe, sharing some academic applications of ChatGPT. He is the coordinator of the UFS Statistical Consultation Unit, where he assists postgrads and staff with advice and analysis of numerical data at no cost to them. He's also senior lecturer in the Department of Mathematical Statistics and Actuarial Science, and vice chair of the General Human Research Ethics Committee. As such, he has worked with staff from all faculties, particularly in research. And on the teaching front, he won an award at the 2022 UFS Learning and Teaching Awards for his efforts in randomized assessments. So today he'll try and provide a quick overview of AI chatbots in academics. And then you will get to meet Ketshepileone Mathloko. You'll notice the AI guide that I'm sharing at the moment. That is her team's hard work in helping us look at AI in our own contexts. She is a lecturer and PhD student specializing in consumer behavior within the area of AI technologies in education. She's in the Department of Sustainable Food Systems and Development, and she works with the ICDF and with us here at the Digital Scholarship Centre. Then Dr. Susan Brokensha will talk about ethical applications in AI. She's been an applied linguist for over 20 years, and her research areas include critical discourse analysis, computer-mediated communication, and framing theory as this relates to emerging technologies such as big data and artificial intelligence. And she is particularly passionate about interrogating the societal and ethical impact of artificial intelligence on the African continent. And then lastly, we will hand over to Herkulaas Combrink for the demo. Herkulaas is the head of the AI for ED research group, and he did his PhD on artificial intelligence in education. His project was nominated by UNESCO as one of the top 100 AI projects in the world addressing the SDG equitable education. And he's only the second South African to hold this title. Additionally, being recognized as an House of Scientist in AI, he was nominated as a BRICS Young Scientist in AI, representing South Africa in China, Brazil, and India. And if you haven't already noticed, he has a passion for applying and using AI to advance education. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you. Yes, so today, let me get it working. Topics for my 10-15 minutes are that AI tools are not new, but they're suddenly popular. A few introduction to the types of tools, uses, abuses, and possible improvements. Okay, so AI is not new. I can think of, particularly in gaming, it's been used for many decades. Rudimentary AI chatbots were in games in the 80s already. And like, if I think of the bots in Unreal Tournament 2004 that can still run circles around kids of today, these things have been around for a while in various forms. If I think of mathematics and statistics, there's specific tools like Wolfram Alpha or Stan that have AI elements that help us solve certain types of problems. But what changed? 2023 saw the release of ChatGPT 3.5 and newer versions to the public. These tools have general purpose usefulness and ability to interpret plain language. This is when the media took notice and it blew up. Okay, so now we have things. So let's have a quick look at the growth. So AI is not new, right? It's been around for a long time, but ChatGPT is new, and ChatGPT has sparked growth and popularity and interest in AI. And because of the media coverage, now, of course, students have taken notice and they're starting to use it, and lecturers are using it. And obviously, we're all here today to talk about it. Okay. So similarly, plagiarism is not new. It's been having ups and interest in plagiarism has been having ups and downs for a long time. Same with detecting plagiarism. But there has been a bit of an uptick lately. But the real growth, at least in search and interest, is in detecting these AIs, because people want to know, are people using the AI to do something, or doing it entirely on their own or something. Okay, so there's a lot of interesting developments. So a few basic thoughts about the AIs. Now, in my view, what makes them really good is that they expand and contract text. They can summarize complicated topics quite clearly. They can take simple things, expand them quite nicely. It really explains things in very plain language that easy to work with. I see them a lot like Wikipedia page generators. They make something that resembles a Wikipedia page on the fly based on what you ask, but they don't have accuracy checks. Okay, they don't really have a deep concept of right or wrong, correct or incorrect, except for the checks and balances installed by the creators. Okay, for example, the creators set rules like it may not tell people how to build a bomb, right? Obvious things like that. But it's not sort of an inherent self-taught thing. They're simply language models based on general internet text, so they have a lot of the same biases that the internet has. Okay. There are fascinating videos on the internet about how these things work, like behind the scenes. I'm not going to go into that. But the core is simply generating a piece of text one word at a time. So starts with a word, picks the next word, picks the next word, and eventually you've got paragraphs of text. Okay, so what are the main ones? And I say main ones because more than 1,000 new AI chatbots have or variations have appeared in the last few months. But most of them are in some way linked to these. Okay, so the first and most obvious one is ChatGPT 3.5. It's free, it's useful, easy to access. And that's the one that got the publicity. Then there's a ChatGPT 4, which is supposed to be better. The official version is $20 a month. It has all the best plugins to enhance its functionality. There's the new Bing AI, which is also ChatGPT 4, but free, which is obviously very nice, save $20 a month. But you have to use Edge, and there's different interface and less plugins and so on. Then there's Google's Bard, which is in a sense the main competitor because it's not related to ChatGPT. But I want to immediately get into one of the key issues with these chatbots, at least for us. And that is that they were not directly trained on academic papers. Well, to a small extent they were, but not in general. Certainly not papers behind any paywalls. Okay. So expecting any sort of academic rigor out of the box is going to cause you problems. Okay. Now, there are alternatives. There are specific research tools available, like Elicit and Consensus, but these are not chatbots. Okay, these are single-step tools where you say what you're looking for. It tries to interpret it and find relevant papers, and then it will briefly try and summarize the top papers that match your search. So it will use the ChatGPT idea to summarize papers, but it is not itself a chatbot. And what's nice about these is the first thing they present to you are the top papers themselves, not the summary. So you do get that academic rigor by seeing the references first. Then you get a summary, and with Consensus, if you pay, then you can get summaries generated using ChatGPT 4 instead of the older models, which is quite nice. Okay, so how do we use it as lecturers? Well, one way is creating assessments. They're very good for generating word prompts because that's what they do. They spit out words. They're very bad at solving some of these word problems, like anything math, statistics, probability, but they are pretty good at translating. So they will, for example, if you ask them to solve your word problem, they will usually reword your word problem in the form of something resembling an answer. They might not answer it, but it will still look like vaguely like an answer. They are very good at translating, including translating into programming code. So you can ask it, how do I code this thing in this language? And it will tell you more or less. Usually there will be errors. And that brings me to a key point that may come up multiple times today. And that is that these AI chatbots are very often an excellent starting point, but a poor end point. So I would use it, for example, to give me an outline of a word problem, deal with the creativity problem. So I'm not asking things exactly the same way every time. But I would then still go and work out the memo to a large extent myself. Like I said, starting point, but not an end point. They're excellent for answering basic student questions about the work. If students ask you silly questions or annoying questions or repeated questions, copy the question into Bing, copy the answer back to the student. I was really surprised. The student asked me, what does this line of code means? I copied it into the chatbot, and the response that the chatbot gave included examples and details and breakdowns of every term, way more effort than I was willing to put in a fraction of the time. I just link it back to them. You can use it to draft difficult emails. For example, if you feel like writing an angry email to a coworker or boss, you can paste it in the chatbot and say, please make this email more diplomatic. Avoid some conflict there. You can ask it to write motivating Blackboard posts. There's lots of little uses, but it boils down to, working with text, words. Okay. One of my assignments this semester, I created entirely using ChatGPT from one short prompt. Now, you might say, that sounds awesome. Why is it under issues? Well, it got even better because I then, a colleague said, don't forget to ask it for a rubric. So I said, please give me a rubric for the above assignment. And bam, it gives me the entire rubric. I take it as is with acknowledgement and I post it. So I've got assignment, quick. It was about 5 minutes to create a large assignment with a rubric. Very easy. Everything seemed fantastic until, of course, I had to mark it. And what I realized was that, of course, ChatGPT was built before ChatGPT was a thing. So the rubric that it built did not account for the students using ChatGPT to answer the assignment. Okay, Piet asked, why would I want to paste students' questions? And the answer is yes, saving time. The answers that ChatGPT gives are often better or faster and more detailed in much less time. So that's really one of the things that keep coming up with these chatbots is theoretically they can be time savers. But like I said, we have to adapt. If students can use AI to answer an assignment, the rubrics, memos, mark allocations must adapt to take that into account. Okay. Now, obviously, the easiest way to adapt is to say no, students are not allowed to use it, but you have to be quite careful and take serious steps to monitor that. But if they are allowed to use it, we've got to take that into account. Okay, so how do students use it? Students around the world are using these bots as cheap alternatives to tutors. Okay, and that's a good thing. They ask the bots to explain the notes to them. So the parts that are maybe seem too long, they will ask the bots to summarize. The parts that they don't understand, that seem too short, the students can ask the bots to expand on. The bots can give very easy introductions to topics. Okay? And they can even quiz. You can say, please give me a multiple choice in this context on this topic, wait for my response and assess my response. And it can very often do that. So there are a lot of good uses. These are just a few examples. Okay. In my course, students use ChatGPT extensively. It's an honors course, and they asked it to explain certain concepts to them. They asked it to generate code to get it going. They use it in nearly all the assessments, including semester tests. No, it does a continuous evaluation. There was an exam. So basically, all the assessments, they used ChatGPT. And I promoted this because I gathered from my students that in their workplace, they are encouraged to use ChatGPT, right? And I want to prepare my students for their workplace. Carl asks, ChatGPT is much better than or 4 is better than 3.5. Why don't we subscribe? Well, the UFS works mostly with a Microsoft license in a Microsoft environment. And so I think the idea of the university is you're welcome to use the new Bing AI, which is based on ChatGPT 4. It does use ChatGPT 4 behind the scenes. I can recommend it. I do use it myself for a lot of purposes. Okay, now for the bad side. Student abuses. I've had students submit assignments where almost everything is just copy pasted from ChatGPT. Okay, now that's really annoying. It's makes me sad. But in my view, ChatGPT is not itself the problem. Copy pasting is. Most of the students used it nicely as a starting point, reworked the text, and I see nothing wrong with that if the reworking is thorough and transformative. Okay, good starting point, but not a good end point. ChatGPT can hallucinate and talk a whole lot of nonsense, can make up fake references. And what I noticed is when students relied on it to answer questions, they very often missed key aspects of the question or answer. Okay. So how to adapt? Well, step one, use it yourself. Okay, by using it yourself, you learn what it can do, can't do, how it presents things, and how to identify it. Most obvious ways to identify is when students just copy paste it straight. Okay, if students have questions in their answers or words that are clear response to a prompt, things like if the student response starts with "sure, here is an explanation of," or "certainly," or it ends with "here are some links," and then the links never come, then you know the student just blindly copy pasted without even reading the output. Another clue is if the language style does not match that of the student in general. ChatGPT language by default is fairly immaculate, which often better than that of our students. Now, of course, students can direct ChatGPT to add grammar and spelling mistakes deliberately to the language in order to try and fool us, but most students haven't done that yet, especially, and the ones who are so lazy that they're just copy pasting without thinking are also the ones that are too lazy to actually try and deceive, usually. Turnitin has an AI detection tool, okay, that does not rely on anything that I've just talked about. It has its own methods, and it tries to pick up AI use. It's not brilliant, but it is useful. If it says 100%, you know there's a problem. If it says 0%, probably no problem. Something in between can mean a lot of things. Okay. Sometimes it's fine if the use isn't excessive. Sometimes it's not fine. That's where things get a bit gray. But it still is useful for certain types of assignments. If you want to enforce rules, put those rules in writing. I know the business school makes an effort to tell students what they may and may not do. And they also say, you need to explain to students how to properly credit the AI chatbots. You can tell students they need to state the prompts they use, quote things they copy without alteration, and so on. But there needs to be communication between you and the students as to what is okay and what is not okay. You can't enforce rules if there are no rules. And the final step that I recommend is adjust your mark allocations and your rubrics and so on. Okay, so standard ChatGPT language does not normally include real references. So if you expect references, increase the mark allocation for providing real references. Maybe give serious credit for integrating real references into the flow of the text. Whereas AI will often merely give you a few links at the end. And ChatGPT responses tend to be superficial. If you're able to raise the cognitive level of required responses or change the focus or style of questions to require depth, then that will thwart, to a large extent, those who are just blindly copy-pasting. So, in conclusion, there is already extensive teaching literature on how to promote deep learning and combat academic misconduct. Most of that knowledge still applies in this new AI world and is useful with AI chatbots. Okay, the university has many programs in place to help lecturers in this regard. You can contact your teaching and learning manager or CTL representative probably for more information on these things. Yeah, there are things available. I think I've covered the key points here. Morse is asking about the plagiarism policy. I don't know about any updates coming to that? I think the other speakers will talk about that point.
Thank you very much, Sean. Yes, and you've covered a lot of the benefits and risks as well. So thank you very much for that. We'll take more questions after the other panel members have had a chance to speak. Ketshepileone, can we hand over to you?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Sean, thank you so much for your presentation, because what I'm about to present actually feeds on to what you said. So I prepared my presentation in a Word document. I'll be presenting on the capabilities and limitations of ChatGPT. Usually when you log on to ChatGPT on the screen, you will see it will tell you a bit of its capabilities and limitations. So as we know, mostly ChatGPT, it's a language-based model, and it works with text. I created some prompts just to show examples on how its capabilities are in academia. So for example, for the assessment development, I'm just going to copy and paste this. In terms of developing assessment in ChatGPT, it if you write the questions well, it will sort of like try and follow the instructions that you give. But if you just not sure of what you want, chances of it misleading you are actually very high. My internet is a bit slow. I don't know if it's my ChatGPT or my internet. Anyway, so it can assist in terms of sentence building, more especially if you are not sure of, like, you maybe have an idea of what you want to say, but you don't know where to start or how to go about it. Sorry, I'm just going to refresh this. Okay. I think the problem is maybe my internet. Okay, I will just present then using my slides as an example. So it can assist in terms of sentence building. It will provide examples where it can generate some text that would require you to fill the blank spaces, which in terms of writing, it can assist you more especially if you don't know how to. Sorry, I'm just going to try this for the last time. I hope it works this time.
We can be patient as well.
I'm just, and yeah, anyway, let me just speak in the meantime while we wait to see, because I actually wanted to demonstrate. But also in terms of writing tables and equations, it can do that. But as Dr. Sean explained, some equations in mathematics, it cannot explain it that well, like as a statistician would. So, okay, there's something happening. So for here, I had just asked it to write about food labeling, just as an example. And it will provide a bit of blank spaces here and there, which maybe for a student who is learning how to write can sort of like follow the lines and how it goes. Okay. And secondly, I'm also going to post this, paste this one, but it can do in terms of assessment, and gonna okay. secondly, another thing that it can do, it's, yeah, as I explained, the tables, but it's also very good in terms of helping with brainstorming and generating questions. But what I noticed about ChatGPT through using it is that if you don't know, if you're not sure of what you want, it might completely throw you off to something that which you probably were not even thinking about. It is also good in terms of proofreading and editing, of which you can just write a skeleton, like a skeleton draft ideas of what you have. It can guide you in terms of that. But what I often speak with my friends is that as a person, you shouldn't rely so much on AI, because I feel like you lose your voice as the author, because then everything that is so written, it doesn't sound so much like the text that you would write yourself. It always sounds like it. For me, it sounds a bit robotic. So it's always nice to use it as a guide, but always write something from you, from your side. It, yeah, really. This is very unfortunate. All right. I will just speak then, looking at my presentation here in Word, which will probably take a shorter time. So it is also very good in summarizing. You can select a text, maybe from an article. Let's say you're reading a very complex article that which you are not sure how you understand it. You can copy and paste it and ask it to sort of like summarize for you and maybe explain it to you like a fifth grader. It will be like very simple English that you can understand. But in terms of, there's this document, they call it academic phrase bank. ChatGPT is also capable in terms of assisting you with phrases. And yeah, I always say that it's capable of assisting you as an AI tool, and it's not there to do the work for you, but to assist you in terms of writing. Mostly, some people use it for content creation. This one I copied and pasted it a couple of days ago, um where I was testing it to design like a book novel. So I wrote the prompt. It was just a little bit of a description of the prompt, how I wanted it to be. And ChatGPT did suggest the structure of how the cover of the book should be, the background, the imagery, and the color scheme. So it was more of a brainstorm where we had a back and forth session. And I did follow up prompts where I asked it, can you write 2 sentences to briefly describe to someone, and it did this. So with the tools, its description, I had to summarize it further, and I used it in another AI generator where uh, now that one was an image generator. ChatGPT cannot generate images, but through the descriptions that we had in terms of brainstorming and the book cover, these are some of the images that the AI image generator suggested. So then I asked it, okay, can you assist with doing a marketing campaign for the book No Lines? And it did suggest some ideas on how we can do a marketing campaign from online to influencers. So I think this would be more applicable to academics that want to grow their social media, or maybe it could suggest ways on how to get your published articles out there. And also, we tested this where we used ChatGPT as a recommender system. It's very unfortunate because we're just going to copy this code and paste it, and then ChatGPT can act like a robot where it's a customer service and you just place an order and it will follow instructions as they were written. So the more specific you are in terms of what you want to use ChatGPT for, the better it is in terms of getting answers for it. So I also tried again where I wanted to test it as a online AI librarian assistant, and you give instructions like you're a librarian bot and automated service to assist book requests with book requests and at the library. So it does act like a library, and in the end, it will ask if you would like to have the books picked up or delivered. But obviously, it's not like in reality it will do that. But for people that are looking to develop code, maybe for a recommender system, it could be like a starting point to learn about it and just practice. But it's there are errors in terms of generating code in the ChatGPT. It was actually very fun to work with. Let me just see if we can test it out. Otherwise, no. Okay, I think it's down for now. But I will send the document to Cornell, and people can just copy this, all of it as is, and then paste it on ChatGPT. It will have like a robotic back and forth communications. So this is just a repetition of what Dr. Sean said about ChatGPT. It can generate fake references that which when you click on the links, the page is not found. And it provides information that is only trained on, of which the ChatGPT 3.5 provides information of up to 2021. And it's not like all of it, it's trained on academic articles. So it can provide inaccurate information as well. And it can sometimes answer correct questions incorrectly, and it can be ambiguous questions that are open-ended. Also, if you're not brainstorming well with it, and it can give repetitive answers. And if you use ChatGPT long enough, you can see when a text is ChatGPT generated. And in terms of language translation, there are some languages that it's very good at, but some languages, for example, Setswana, some of the African languages, it has very limited training on that, and it's not always accurate in terms of that. But yeah, it can generate limited characters, so it's not like you can paste very long text, like maybe 30,000 words. It's not going to um, capture all of it or give you that much characters. So my thoughts when using ChatGPT, it is capable in terms of text, but you must know what you want and you must be very specific. The more specific you are, the better the results you will get. But also you must use the words that you understand, and it's important to not rely too much on it. You must know exactly what you want when using ChatGPT. Because if you rely so much on it that it writes everything for you, let's say, for example, you have to defend your PhD and they ask questions and you wrote everything with ChatGPT, it's going to be difficult to answer questions because then you didn't do a lot. But it should be you as a researcher before ChatGPT, not ChatGPT before you as a researcher. So yes, I know it's very short, but thank you so much for your time. It's very unfortunate that yeah, my ChatGPT was a bit, yeah, it's a bit busy, but yes, that's what I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tsepi. We really appreciate it, and yes, we'll share the content with you, and you can go and experiment as well. I just quickly want to say that what Sepi said about, losing your voice if you use ChatGPT or similar too much. But also, if you use it long enough, you start recognizing it. And that's been my experience, because I've been using it quite a lot in an administrative way to test it and to understand it. And the other day I saw an email that I sent to someone with, I think it was an invitation. And I immediately recognized that's not my voice. I used ChatGPT to write that, even though I adapted it. Right, so next up, Dr. Brokensha. We'd love to hear from you. Already questions about ethics in the chat box, so over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm just quickly sharing my screen with you. I hope that you can all see.
Yes.
I'm just going to switch my camera on momentarily to say hello to you, and then I'm going to switch myself off. So thank you so much for being here and for being prepared to listen to my presentation, during which I will briefly touch on what I believe to be the major risks of using ChatGPT in a tertiary environment. Now, on the surface, ChatGPT's risks are pretty obvious and very serious. Among other things, as you can see on the slide here. Right, so as you can see on that screen, among other things, the risks relate to accuracy, to reliability, to questionable privacy and data security measures, to lack of academic integrity, and of course to bias and fairness. And by the way, all the information generated on this particular slide, into which I'm now alluding, was entirely generated by ChatGPT. So essentially, and in theory, all I had to do was ask this tool a few basic questions about its ethical risks, and then design, oops, I don't know what's happening there, Cornell. I'm actually not touching my computer, so I'm not sure why that keeps happening. Let's try again.
I can share your presentation from my side. We can see if that...
Yeah, perhaps that's better.
Okay.
So as I was saying, all I then had to do was ask the tool a few basic questions about its ethical risks and then design a presentation in the space of about 3 minutes with minimal effort and without any reflection. So this begs the question, is this laziness or is it smart productivity? So next slide, please, Cornell. So I asked ChatGPT if using it was lazy, and this is the answer that it gave me. Using ChatGPT or any other AI-powered tool can potentially make you more efficient. However, whether it makes you lazy or not ultimately depends on how you use it and your own approach to work and productivity, as the previous two speakers alluded to. So on the next slide then, Cornell, thank you, quite a few researchers are in fact delving into issues around laziness, and 2 recent studies appear in Humanities and Social Sciences Communications as well as in a preprint. Among others, fears revolve around reductions in human decision making and in the de-skilling, as it were, of humans. The one study by Ahmad et al., for example, concludes that using AI in education increases the loss of human decision-making capabilities, making users lazy by performing and automating the work. The other, by Sisson et al., warns that humans are often lazy to check the veracity of outputs and allow themselves to be fooled, not only because these are machine generated, but also because the language is formally impeccable and convincing. A negative feedback loop between laziness and credulity produces over-reliance, which further de-skills humans in discovering the truth. Eventually, they become inured to misinformation and hallucinations. So the next slide then, Cornell, what's problematic is that although ChatGPT could function as a useful co-pilot, it is, as we all know, a slippery slope to make it do all the navigating, as it were. I've deliberately brought up the whole metaphor of the co-pilot because it's used over and over again, and to the best of my knowledge, and the more technical folk here in the room could correct me, I do think that there is an AI tool out there at the moment, and I know that it's called Copilot, and there are huge issues with this metaphor if we're going to give over all duties, all responsibilities, and all decision making over to these kinds of tools. So on the next slide then, if I just do a quick breakdown of some of the issues around these risks, if we look solely at students' assignments, for example, the de-skilling of their ability to detect the veracity of sources is, of course, of significant concern. Most academics introduce their students to tests such as the CRAAP test to assess the currency, the relevance, the authority, the accuracy, and the purpose of the sources they use. Now, getting students to effectively assess the provenance of a source is already difficult enough, but it's not possible to apply this kind of test when we don't even know exactly what sources ChatGPT is using in the first place. And then just kind of a sidebar, I read something quite interesting this morning where a philosophy professor at, I think it's Northern Michigan University, suspected that one of his postgrad students had plagiarized a paper using ChatGPT. So he decided to hand over this paper to ChatGPT, and he asked it, did you write this paper? And ChatGPT's answer was, and I'm quoting, I am 99.9% certain that I wrote this paper. So you could perhaps experiment and ask ChatGPT if it suspects that it is the culprit there. With respect to assuming that ChatGPT's language is impeccable, this is not true. Its command of language appears to be impressive on the surface, but any argument it generates generally lacks cogency and factual accuracy when a deeper dive is taken. I think we've all noticed this by now. Staying with language for the moment, one risk identified by Tomlinson et al., and I think you can go over to the next slide, thank you, Cornell, is that the constant use of ChatGPT means that writing becomes mechanical and formulaic, devoid of uniqueness and of human creativity. In my view, what may be worse is that if human decision-making goes out the window, then so does empathy and emotional intelligence. As one scholar noted in a study in the Annals of Biomedical Engineering, while ChatGPT models can generate responses that do sound natural and empathetic, they lack true emotional intelligence and may not be able to provide the same level of emotional support as required in many of our disciplines. And Cornell, you can go to the next slide and skip over that one. And you can go to the next one and then the next one. Thank you so much. So I do have some partial solutions to these ethical risks. They are based partly on work that I've done with Professor Edwin Coetzee from the Department of Computer Science and Informatics, as well as Dr. Birgit Senekal, who is a research fellow there. We recently published a book with Chapman and Hall entitled AI in and for Africa. And in it, we suggest adopting a relational ethics of care that puts humans in the AI loop. Mitigating risks, of course, goes beyond addressing those related to issues like privacy and security, for example. The kind of tenets that we should be following are those that emphasize human creativity and problem solving, complex decision-making processes, curiosity, the preservation of personal values, and the like. And you can go over to the next slide there briefly, Cornell. I just took this directly from the book. We really think that to put together any kind of a policy document, an ethical guide around AI is going to require a humanistic view of AI, where we really interrogate ourselves rather than interrogate AI. And I know it sounds rather simplistic, but in lots of conversations I'm having, the focus seems to be almost solely on the machine itself and not on what we are doing as humans. So I do think this is the last slide, Cornell. In our view, any ethics guide written around generative AI needs to embrace what Bart Zell, many, many moons ago, I think 10 years ago already, identified as pluralism, participation, advocacy, embodiment, and self-disclosure. So pluralism underscores the fact that students cannot rely, and of course I'm talking about staff too, we can't rely on a tool like ChatGPT to solve the world's problems, that a plurality of harmonious and divergent voices is required when it comes to decision making, problem solving, and the like. Participation is for us a principle that emphasizes that as humans, we can't be passive recipients of ChatGPT's constructions, while advocacy encourages continuously questioning the tool's impact on society, the environment, and so forth. For us, embodiment means being aware of and then addressing ChatGPT's intricate intersections with race, with gender, and the future world of work, for example. And then finally, self-disclosure has to do with being transparent about ChatGPT's black box problem, amongst others, that OpenAI is not open, as it were, to disclosing ChatGPT's parameters. So essentially, although I am an applied linguist and not a philosopher, my presentation does have a philosophical slant. That is, to mitigate ChatGPT's ethical risks, we need to question our own natures, our motives, and our own capabilities if we do want to use this tool in an ethical and responsible manner. And that is the end of my short presentation. Thank you. Thanks, Cornell, for turning the pages.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's so many things that you've mentioned has triggered so many thoughts. I'm sure that the same has happened to everyone else. Before we start with the demonstration, just thanks again to all the panelists. Are there any questions that, I see Sean's hand's up. Sean?
I think we really need to get stuck in is ethical issues. But before we do that, I just want to raise a point she made about asking ChatGPT about whether it wrote something. And that is a very bad idea. ChatGPT will take credit for anything, even things written a very long time ago. There are also tools like ChatGPT Zero or something, GPT Zero or something that tries to do that. They don't work I would not recommend going down that road. A professor in the US has recently faced some serious disciplinary action for accusing a lot of students of plagiarism, where those students have definitive proof they wrote it before ChatGPT existed. And yet ChatGPT says, no, it's 100% sure it wrote it. So we have to be very careful when accusing a student of plagiarism, just because there's elements of ChatGPT.
Yes, if I may quickly interrupt, Sean, that is so true. With this professor of philosophy in Michigan, he got into some hot water because he took this tech. So yes, you've got to be so careful, as we had to be anyway when it comes to accusing students of
we do
plagiarizing.
have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then on the ethical issues you raise, is there some framework or steps we can take to try to teach students the right or better ways? And I suppose there isn't one right way, but better ways.
Yeah, that's such an important question that I hope everybody today will help us answer, Sean. I'm not thinking so much about the micro level. Yeah, I'm thinking more on a macro level.
Okay.
I'm so regretful that I myself did not take philosophy or ethics as an undergrad. And I really think that we're going to have to get students going back to becoming ethicists, and to going back to philosophy, because it's, I didn't have philosophers here today in the room. I wish there were, because I do think everybody needs to go back to philosophy and to go back to ethics. And also I think very important to also take a look at our own African indigenous knowledge systems, our own African philosophical frameworks to answer these questions. So I'm sorry I'm being so highfalutin. I guess I don't sound very practical, but I think we need to get students to be sensitive to what they're doing with AI. Just the other day, for example, I asked my students, I don't think they agreed with me, but I tried. I said to them, how would they feel in about 4 years' time when they completed their degrees? How would they feel to know that that degree was done practically by ChatGPT? That ChatGPT needs to go up and attend the graduation ceremony and get the degree, and not them. I don't think they were so impressed with my argument, but I just guess I'm trying to get students to think about what they are doing, what it means for them. I always speak to students about the outer CV, which is your degree, your qualifications, your skills, but I speak a lot about Habermas's inner CV. Can you live with your inner CV one day? But like I say, I'm probably speaking to students who are half asleep because my lectures may be boring, they might be long. So I don't know if I got to one student out of 400, perhaps I've made a difference. So I don't know if it answers your question, Sean, but that's for me the point of departure.
Yes. Also, I think what you said now about, speaking on a more philosophical level, but the practical, again, immediately from the library side, I can identify certain aspects where the library, the Centre for Graduate Support, the Research Office, all of the different support structures at the university can work together to make sure that we do get our students back to being the ethicists that you spoke about. I do see there were a few questions in the chat box that Sean answered. If you feel that your question hasn't been answered, then just give us an indication. But right now, I really would like to hand over to Herkulaas for the demonstration, because this also usually generates a lot of ideas and questions as well. So Herkulaas, thank you so much. You're welcome to go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my yourself. Hello to everyone. And thank you so much for the introduction and all the previous speakers as well. There's a lot of context that was covered. Unfortunately, I saw now that there was a high volume traffic and the internet speed, probably due to load shedding at particular parts in Bloemfontein, is not good. So for people trying to use ChatGPT now, there might be issues. And so I quickly, while people were talking, just put some of the things on here, but I just wanted us to wrap our heads around all of these concepts. I'm not going to repeat the demonstration that was done by Ketshepileone. For anyone who wants to use the prompt, please do consult the LibGuides as where this information and these presentations will be shared, because it's quite useful to try it out yourself. So I'm just going to stop my screen, or me sharing, and I'm just going to share my screen so that everyone can see. Just a simple confirmation would suffice.
Yep, we can.
Oh, great. So quintessentially within the University of the Free State, I wear two hats. I'm a co-director for the Interdisciplinary Center for Digital Futures alongside Katinka de Wet, but I also reside from the Office of the Dean in Economics and Management Sciences. Now, if we look at this umbrella of AI for Ed, it really has to do with these major concepts. Something like personalized adaptive learning, which is something that isn't widely used yet. So this is where systems learn from users of the system in real time in the education context at scale. These technologies do exist, and there's a lot of different companies that play with these things, but it hasn't quite reached us yet, but it definitely will. Digital classrooms with personalized conversation agents. So imagine teaching something online, and then as you speak something into existence, the virtual platform tends to change into that particular space. Then obviously what ultimately would happen is that these things would emulate into a physical space, and then other AI assisted technologies, education technologies would emerge, things that we haven't really discussed. Sean touched on something really important at the beginning. Artificial intelligence, large language models, and a lot of the AI tools that are available out there are not new, right? So these things have been used for a long time. It's just popularized among other disciplines. So people are only now seeing the potential of these by using it in real time. But I must just sort of confirm a few things. We must not forget science, right? So science is an iterative process, and the pros and cons of using ChatGPT today are not going to be the pros and cons of using ChatGPT tomorrow, because the models tend to get better and the unintended consequences with each iteration become more sophisticated and more complex. And so I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page with this, that, you know, if we look at a very basic idea of a system has different processes and components in it. So think about something like an engine, and the system would be the engine itself. A complicated system would be something like a hybrid vehicle, so where you have physical processes and digital processes all working together to make one vehicle run. And then a complex system is where you have quite a large variety of systems and complicated systems working together to form one complex system. Now, AI in education really is the embodiment of a complex system. So what we're dealing with, if we have a ChatGPT conversation, isn't just the simple part of the plagiarism, but there's a lot of complexities associated with it beyond what we are arguing and talking about today, because it forms part of a much larger education system. So this is quite important. And to really illustrate this, very recently put up polls on different platforms to the public. The things that terrify the public a little bit more about AI is AI in healthcare and AI in routine daily life. So in daily routine life, people aren't really talking much about AI in education and AI in politics, but rather the integration of how AI replaces us in sort of the mundane daily tasks. What should education focus on when we assess, when we physically assess students? And the majority of the people point out critical thinking, real world application, and problem solving, but memorization is not one of them. Now, I do know that we sit with a quorum of academics that the assessments in and of themselves are memorization forms a very big part of it, because for certain bodies like the Health Professionals Council of South Africa, there are certain competencies associated to tacit knowledge that the individuals need to have. But what makes generative large language models such as ChatGPT really powerful is that we can touch on to some of the concepts that Dr. Sean had mentioned, which deal with problem solving, critical thinking, and really working on touching some real world application. And then obviously, when asking a global consortium, just what are the quickest that would be replaced in the education space, virtually no one said lecturers, but that the administration, some of the learning material, and specifically the learner support would be replaced. Now, part of the demonstration, and I'm unfortunately ChatGPT is down, so I couldn't physically show you that. We created a prompt, quite an extensive prompt. And so this is a concept that I would like all of you to take note on. The concept is known as prompt engineering, or as we like to call it, design autonetics. So this is where you find effective ways to communicate with a computer. So this is one of the skills that people need to learn about in the generative AI space, is how to use design autonetics or prompt engineering to be able to effectively communicate with computers. At the moment, the prompts that were given, and Dr. Sean pointed it out, he used a very basic prompt, but later on in his presentation, everyone here would agree that the prompts became more sophisticated. It gets to a point where the types of prompts that we build on are quite lengthy, where you are quite explicit with what you want and what you don't want. And when you use prompt engineering and design autonetics to design a particular prompt, you realize that you need to have quite a large number of subject matter expertise. You need to provide very detailed context, and then only can whatever is generated after that be in line with the prompt that you had given. So this is an important concept because not everyone sees the level of detail and thought that goes into an AI generated text. It is to such an extent that you could spend more time providing more context than a larger prompt for an AI to write a coherent one paragraph. And the argument here is, in order for you to generate those prompts, you need to have done your homework extensively, understand the subject matter and the context in which you need to apply it. And then only would whatever the AI is generating be meaningful or useful in this space. So this brings us to some of the sort of broad, high-level pros and cons, right? I'm not going to really touch on and read all of these extensively, but one thing that should not be forgotten, and Ketshepileone did mention this, is the author's voice and the critical thinking of the academic themselves when they physically use this type of technology. Think about something like ChatGPT as a soundboard. If you are at a first year level or a high school level, then the answers generated from a generative pre-trained transformer like ChatGPT or Bard might seem incredibly coherent, but as Dr. Brokensha pointed out, it seems like it's coherent because the words make sense next to one another, but it lacks context, it lacks logic, and it lacks depth. Now, obviously, as these large language models improve and become more sophisticated over time, so too will the sophistication of the logic, and eventually we'll get to a point where we'll have a completely different conversation. But what is important to note is that if a generative pre-trained transformer's answer is in line and accurate with what your students are supposed to know or learn, then a much deeper fundamental pedagogical question needs to be asked about the subject matter that is being taught for that particular leg of the education journey. This is important. it's important for us to be self-critical and really reflect truly on the shift in pedagogy that is taking place as a result of the enhancements that can come from generative pre-trained transformers. Now, to this extent, just mentioning it to the quorum, in the second semester and next year, we're going to run what we call the ChatGPT sandboxes and the AI-assisted education technology sandboxes with academics, where we know what we know and we know which prompts to use from prompt engineering or design automatics principles. We know what to do and what kind of answers we can get from that. But it is very specific to the lenses that we have in the field. It's impossible to lay claim over the totality of knowledge production and generation that takes place in the space. So we want more academics to assist us in these sandboxes and sandbox discussions as well as experimentation. So please do see this as an opportunity if you want to be a part of this, even if it is just to purely critique and to see what is happening so that you can understand and empower yourselves, then it would be a valuable place to go into. And the reason why we're doing this is so that we can work with all of these sandbox discussions to ultimately create a policy draft, not just for the UFS community, but much larger, using these sandboxes so that we can inform within an academic space, how do we address and deal with these issues? Okay, so what must be explored in this space is really use cases for how do we use this technology. A lot of people are mentioning that it is generative pre-trained transformers lack context. Yes, at the moment they do, but what if the University of the Free State invests in building up a corpus based on legal text, for example, and we build our own GPT? Let's call it Law GPT. And then the model will be trained on all our legal texts. So if that GPT fails with logic or anything like that, then it could be indicative of the data that we train it on. Perhaps we don't have enough data, or perhaps the data isn't labeled correctly, or perhaps there are lots of contradictions in the underlying information. And this brings us to a very important point. All the issues that we are seeing with AI-assisted education technologies have an underlying and fundamental process within human thinking that is also flawed. An example of this is ChatGPT versus ghostwriting or a virtual assistant. So some people are arguing that ChatGPT is plagiarizing, which in and of itself, by its very definition, might be, but it's not your conventional plagiarism. I mean, as Dr. Shawn had explained and showed, it generates it one word at a time. So it could be text that has never before been generated. So it's not quite plagiarism in the sense that it copies something word for word, but definitely is plagiarism, as in if you copy something directly from another source that is not your own, it could be seen as something like a ghost writing. But if ChatGPT is prompted in the correct way to provide some context and give some kind of a paragraph or some kind of a text that is relevant to an assignment that a student has, or even relevant to summarizing a particular concept, but it's not used directly. It's used as a soundboard to see what kind of text is available on the subject matter. And then you, as the academic, critique or critically assess it, or you teach the students to critically assess it and really use it as a soundboard rather than a tool to copy and paste text. Then it functions more like a virtual assistant or a writing assistant. Something that we're seeing with the use of generative pre-trained transformers and other AI technology or AI education technologies, the more people use this technology, and again, going back to a point that Dr. Shawn made when he was referencing, I believe it was Unreal Tournament, but in gamification, the more people use these kinds of models and the more people use this type of technology, the better they become at performing certain tasks. So what are some of the gains that we get when people use this type of technology? And this again brings us back down to this fundamental question, is that we as humans need to know how to solve the problem. Otherwise, the model will not solve the problem. And we shouldn't leave problem solving to models without that context. Anyone who understands a little bit how these pre-trained transformers and how artificial intelligence works, would understand that the models tend to do this trade-off between exploration and exploitation. So this is a very important part. I'm just going to make sure one last time that the prompt works or doesn't work, if ChatGPT is online or offline. So let me just quickly try it again. I changed my internet quickly, but I don't think so. I think the load shedding schedules really, I think the load shedding schedules have really done a part on this. So I don't think we'll be able to practically, unfortunately, use this. And I see due to high demand, it must be there. But one of the prompts that we're going to put out there is called the Delian prompt. So the Delian prompt is something that we're building into a system, spoiler alert for next year, where we want to use design autonetics to build a recommender system for students. So if students want academic advising or students have a particular issue, like they would like to, that they have food insecurity or socioeconomic challenges, then we could create an interface by which students can privately message the interface, and then the interface with a human touch can come back to the student. Some of you have worked with your traditional chatbots, would have known that it's very USSN based. So if you have a query about X, press 1. If you have a query about X, press 2. Whereas if you have a conversation, you say, I don't quite know what's going on, but I don't know where to go in my registration process. I'm in humanities. I have this particular problem. Then if prompt correctly in the back end, it would be able to have a conversation with the student and guide the student. Oh, are you saying that this is your problem? Are you saying that that is your problem? And by using prompt engineering principles, we would be able to get to that point. Unfortunately, because ChatGPT is off, I can't physically show you some of these really cool demonstrations. But the great thing is we're going to put these examples on the LibGuide so that you could experiment and play with it yourself. And all the papers that we have published on this or that are in review on this, we have some preprints available of it as well so that you could explore and see for yourself how this technology can benefit you. And maybe perhaps you can get your own research ideas to explore in this domain. But apologies for, the fact that the very thing we're talking about is offline due to some very real infrastructure issues that we have in the Free State province.
Thanks, Herkulaas. Yes, I think what we could maybe do as well is to, well, like you say, share the prompt so that people can go and work on it themselves. But maybe we'll create a video of us doing it, and then they can see the demonstration in the end. Before I take some more questions, kind of a combination of what you said and Dr. Brokensha. So it's ethical and technical. Dr. Brokensha mentioned that we shouldn't just be passively involved. So are we only passively involved if we use these apps? Are we not actively contributing just by asking questions? And then part of my question there is also, so with regards to ethical responsibility of everyone using AI, how do we teach our students that no matter how they use it, they are contributing? That's my first question. And that it is also an ethical responsibility for everyone using these AI technologies to interact with it in a certain way. I don't know if you Herkulaas, if you want to answer.
I'm just, because I know I have an inkling of also Dr. Susan and Dr. Sean and Ketshepileone that have views on this particular issue as well. But a very important point, and again, not using this necessarily as too much of a space for my own research at all, but this is very important. We wrote an article about the issues with machine learning in education research, data sharing specifically. And the point that we made, and this, I'm just going to share the link. The point that we made was that if we are not actively involved in the innovation of the technologies, also the use case of these technologies to our context, then ultimately we will become third-party users indefinitely. This is something that we see in the trend with AI and machine learning research on the African continent. The real giants are in Asia and the Americas. And what's happening now is that a lot of our data, a lot of our information comes from these different spaces of the world and not necessarily us. So we are becoming users of these technologies rather than actively being involved in debating and critiquing the very ethics that impact us directly. So we have a lot of these ethical debates that are happening on behalf of South Africans, on behalf of Africans. And so from our research perspective and why these conversations are so important and why we are driving this sandbox process and working so closely with the Digital Scholarship Center and a variety of other places on campus from the interdisciplinary center side is so that we can get academics more and more critically involved in these processes. Now, obviously, this is iterative. I mean, you're not going to get someone who has domain-specific expertise in, for example, social science, philosophy, history, to become, an avid scholar in critiquing AI extensively overnight. But what is important is that people become more and more immersed in the jargon, in the language, and truly understand how they work so that they can start critiquing it from their domain specific. This is not only for niche research, but we really have an obligation to do this. Otherwise, we're going to continuously and indefinitely make sure that we are users of this technology, and the ethics of it would be debated on behalf of us rather than us debating it for ourselves.
Sorry, Dr. Brokensha?
Yes, I really want to underscore what Herkulaas has just said about that immersion, how incredibly important it is. One of the major problems that I have at the moment, experimenting with prompts, etc., is that the data is really Western-centric. It doesn't answer many of the questions we have about our own global South issues. So I think if our students, for example, are aware of that, they'll use it. They will hopefully use it with a lot more caution. So I definitely agree with Herkulaas about immersion. Thanks, Cornell.
Okay. There's a question from Ina Gous, or a comment really, and I'd like to hear from the panelists if they agree. She says, surely though AI like ChatGPT forces us, employers and employees, universities charged with students learning to be forward thinking when it comes to work, etc. To me, this shows us that we are not. I don't know if you want to expand maybe on this, what you're referring to.
I'm just thinking that the future of work, of our place as the human factor in what is coming, and is not as central to our thinking and our planning as it should be, whether we are employees, employers, or, like I said, universities charged with students learning. I don't think we factor this in enough. We are still obviously stuck in the 4IR setup, and AI, is supposed to be next. But I think we need to be way more thinking about what is going to the skills that what we're going to need as humans working in this environment, also for our students.
So I think that conversations like these and the efforts from the ICDF and various departments working together is really what is getting us there.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah. There's another comment from Gray. He had an interesting conversation about the use of a ghostwriter versus using generative AI tools. They settled on the view that your personal ethical principles ultimately play a major role. And universities are using chatbots to assist students with engaging with learning material or general inquiries, and they are conducting great research on improving engagement with students. But many articles emphasize having a human in command. So I think that is actually a very good summary of what was said as well, in terms of the applications and the human aspect. Are there any other last pressing questions, maybe from anyone here? Sean?
Yes, if I may. I want to actually connect Ina's question with Herkulaas's comment about engineering prompts. And the first and most obvious criticism or obstruction, or I should say not forward-thinking obstacle that is going to be faced by this is people are going to ask the question, if it takes me twice as long to get the prompt, to figure out the prompt to get what I want, then it takes me to just do it manually, why should I learn to use the AI tool? Not realizing, okay, by practicing, you get better over time and faster. But that mentality persists with all over the university in a lot of areas. And I'm particularly worried it's going to persist here.
So the efforts that we are now starting up with, I think will be important in including everyone in our community and outside the community, the UFS community as well, but including everyone and really creating the awareness on all of these aspects so that we can be a part of it. Any last comments from the panel members? Herkulaas?
Yeah, thank you so much. Just again, emphasizing a very important point that Susan touched on, well, which has more to do with the ethics of AI. But colleagues, you must understand that the science and the mathematics behind our understanding of how this AI works is really modeled of the processes that happen in our own reasoning and thinking. So if an AI reasons a very specific task, now I must be very clear because not everyone understands how to stratify the complexities of tasks in our mind. You really need to understand how these things come together. But if you look at particular decision-making algorithms and how they function and to what degree the AI explores and exploits concepts, etc. These are really modeled after thinking processes that have been studied extensively in behavior and things like that are obviously quantified in a very empirical way, which ultimately at a very deep level, and some philosophers have argued this, one of them being Professor Emma Roodkamp-Plum from the University of Pretoria, who is an absolute specialist also in AI and ethics, has argued that are we seeing a manifestation of some of our fundamental human flaws when it is brought to scale, as opposed to this external force that we are arguing we've never seen before. And more scholars are arguing that what we are seeing in terms of this manifestation of AI-assisted technologies and how they reason and function, etc., really highlight some of the bias that we also find within humans, heavily so. And this is quite an important point that just want colleagues to think about, because as we do these sandboxes, as Dr. Susan leads a lot of these questions, and Dr. Sean within the classrooms, and different academics on this platform. It's very important that we keep these things in mind. The AI is not really a separate species that thinks completely differently to how we think, but rather that it is a manifestation of some of our modeled behavior, some of the biases that we inherently have. And I don't know if that is both equally terrifying, as well as a very interesting insight into what we have.
Ketshepileone.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that, as us as academics, some are really excited about the AI, and they see the potential that it can, how great it can be in the work that we do. But also there are those that are not that easily accepting of the AI. I think it brings a lot of challenges. One of the colleagues was telling me, like, they wish like there was just a set of rules around ethics. Like, when a student copied and paste, what steps do you take? Given that some of these AI detectors are not actually accurate all the time, what is it that I think some people are just looking for a way around AI, because they probably didn't. It was one of those things where you would just see them in the movies, and now it's here in reality, and I think it's a shock for others. It's not everyone who is just as accepting like that. So I think in terms of research, it would be nice, maybe in the sandboxes as well, to just see just how the sandboxes and information collected can sort of like provide guidelines on how to go on, more especially when it comes to ethics and plagiarisms with AI. So yes, those are my thoughts.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, when has ethics ever been easy? If somebody wants an easy way. But yes. So yeah, thank you again for the panelists, for your time and your expertise and just sharing with us. And I think everybody can be very excited about the sandboxes. If you're interested in already becoming involved, please don't hesitate to contact us. And thank you to everybody who attended. It's encouraging to see so many people interested and wanting to learn more, and realizing that we do need to become more involved. Yes, and please look out for any future webinars and events that we'll have around ChatGPT and AI, because we will definitely continue to do this.